Three, two, one. Well, hi there, and welcome to this PowerPoint presentation on embracing neurodiversity. This was originally done for psychological students of a university course, and this tells you how you can embrace neurodiversity in your own workplace or in the community. So let's get on with the presentation. So the topics I'll be talking about today is an introduction of myself as an individual with ASD or person with ASD, bullying and discrimination in life, what's the difference between Asperger's syndrome and autism itself, favourite obsessional topics and my advice to you, and then contacting me. Please like and subscribe to this video and subscribe to my channel. It'd be really very much appreciated. Introduction. When I was a kid or a child, life was extremely difficult and hard to understand why I was like I was. I couldn't talk or make conversation. I couldn't socialize with others. I lived in a world where I was alone. In my brain, I had a black hole, and that's where I thought I would be for the rest of my life. I would sleep all the time to process information or to hide from the world that threatened me. I had no friends to play with, and my sister was sometimes often out playing with hers, which scared me out of my wits. Deep down inside of me, in my soul, I was very lonely and desperate to change the world that I lived in. I needed help, but didn't quite know how to ask for it back then. When I was on my own, I'd do repetitive tasks, like riding my bike up and down a paddock that is now full of shops, and up and down the street, jumping on the trampoline, and just trying to find things to do to keep myself occupied all day. But I went along with what others did, or what my mother had decided for me at the time. I was unable to make my own decisions as well, and Mum had to make up my mind for me. And for those decisions back then, this was the early 70s, 80s, or even 90s. I never even knew I had a comprehension impairment. I didn't even know about imagination. I was just deemed a failure, stupid, useless, and waste of time and space on society. I was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome at the age of 30. Prior to that, I went round not knowing what I had, and I struggled to understand how I hurt other people. The diagnosis also helped me to understand why I believed the way I did. The lack of expectations and acceptance of me wasn't fair, and I was always the problem that nobody wanted to have around or anything to do with in the long run. I was always treated, I felt, like a piece of trash at the tip, and that's where and what I deserved to be treated at the time. When in family situations, I was always three conversations behind others. When I did speak up and say something, I was quite often laughed at, but I embarrassed others. So it was always best for me to be told to shut up, keep quiet, go outside and play, or stay in the background instead. Now, what can you do when there's no play equipment and nothing to do? So continuing on, when you have no play equipment and you don't have an imagination impairment and you just follow others, sometimes it's best just to go and do that, or you just sit outside and then just look at the flowers and look at the trees and think oh, and wonder what you can do. Asperger's syndrome, or AS, also known as Asperger's syndrome, formerly described a formerly described a neurodevelopmental disorder characterized by significant difficulties in social interaction and nonverbal communication, along with restricted and repetitive patterns of behavior, interests, and activities. The syndrome has been merged now with other disorders under the one umbrella into autism spectrum disorder and is no longer considered a standalone diagnosis. It was considered milder than other diagnoses that were merged into ASD by relatively unimpaired spoken language and intelligence. The syndrome was named after the Austrian pediatrician Hans Asperger, who in 1944 described children in his care who struggled to form friendships, did not understand others' gestures or feelings, engaged in one-sided conversations about their favourite interests, and were clumsy. And this is how I was seen in my early days of my life. In 2013, the American Psychiatric Association released the fifth edition of its Diagnostic and Statistical Material of Mental Disorders, DSM-5. The DSM-5 is now the standard reference that healthcare providers use to diagnose mental and behavioural conditions, including autism. So what are the levels of autism spectrum disorder? Level 1 is the mildest or highest functioning form of autism, which includes those who would have previously been diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome. Individuals with ASD level 1 may have difficulty understanding social cues and struggle to form and maintain personal relationships with people. Children and adults who display the most severe symptoms of autism and face challenges living independently. Individuals with low functioning autism are often unaware and unable to understand the consequences of their actions. This happened to me also. Here is a link that is provided for more information for you to look up the levels of autism. Continuing on, level 2. Individuals with level 2 autism need some support in working on communication, social skills, and behavioural deficits. Level 3. Individuals with level 3 autism will require extensive support, which might involve intensive therapies. So my advice to you embracing diversity: accept it, not reject it, as it's all part of our world now, and we have to live amongst those who are neurodiverse, who are part of our world today. Pay attention to how all people are treated or mistreated in society. Create a culture of acceptance and belonging. Consider others and their diverse viewpoints of where they've come from in their world, whether it's their country, race, or even religion, or even disability. Think about it. If you were a neurodiverse person or a non-neurodiverse person, how would you embrace neurodiversity yourself? And what could you do to accept those who are different, but also improve the lives of others who've been judged for who they are, even in their appearance? So I'm going to briefly talk about some favourite obsessive topics. So this here is what's called a sound desk, an Allen and Heath GLD80. This is what I've been using for 10 years at my local church. Now, when I'm on sound, I'm an audio engineer, but I have no qualifications. I've just been taught this piece of fine machinery by someone who worked in the field for over 25 years, and I've been doing this for over 10 years. But I now work with musicians and instruments and could probably now mix a full band, which I've never done so before. But this is a unique gift, and it's spiritually given to me by God, because I became a Christian in 1994, just after my grandmother died. And I was keen and eager to learn this at other churches. But because of my differences or disability at the time, and my Asperger's being diagnosed, but no one would accept me, people found it difficult to associate with me. So I never learned this until I came to this particular church, which I've now associated with and have been there for over 14 years. So here's another piece of machinery. This is me doing live streaming at the church. So as you can see on the far left-hand side of the screen is our service going to YouTube, and we have two cameras, but also a media section, whereas people can watch that online, but also we can record that sermon or anything else for people who are unable to get to church. Just where the computer box is where the picture-in-picture controller is. And then you see the switcher on the left-hand side underneath the main camera screen. And on the right-hand screen is where you can control the cameras, but also the recording, whether we just record it to our computer for our own personal use, or it's recorded to YouTube for people to view. I learned this about 4 years ago, and I'm still doing it now today. So another obsessional topic. Now, I'm sure if you're from Melbourne, Victoria, Australia, you would probably recognise these places. On the left is a bulldog locomotive from the 60s. That's now still going today, and I think it could be S313. And that picture was taken by somebody else, whom I've had permission to put on this slide pack. But also that's coming out of the Bunbury, coming out of Dinan, which is in West Melbourne, and that's been loaded at Kensington at the Grey Mill there, and that train is probably going to Tocumwell or to Denny or to Charlton or to Sea Lake in regional Victoria to be loaded. It could be an empty one, who knows, but that is called the Bunbury Street Gunsel's Tunnel. And if you're lucky enough to get on a train that goes through that tunnel, it's a very long tunnel and it's a great experience. And this is the Maribyrnong River in the background. And of course, the city of Melbourne is there with the wheel. On the right is a red rattler train, and this was taken in the 70s and 80s. And this was at West Toner Station, which had just opened then. But the red rattlers were some of the trains that had were used on the Melbourne metropolitan network, and these were the main ways of us getting into town and to other parts of Melbourne at the time. They're still now used as part of special train trips on SteamRail, and if you'd like to ride on those trains, just go to www.steamrail.com.au. So the picture on the left is the Hitachis, and they ran from the 80s to the mid-90s. And the one on the right are the Blue Harris trains, and they were retired from service. However, they were run with locomotive services from V-Line, and they have been mostly retired, these carriages. They're stored currently at Echuca, Victoria. However, some heritage groups have secured some of those carriages that have been refurbished, and V-Line, as of now, being the 26th of June 2025, are currently running the last locomotive service to Swan Hill, which is in the far northwest of Victoria. These trains were very bouncy, and the doors fell open, and there was no electric doors now to keep people safe. And now on the modern services, they were they're now used, but as electric trains. But as you can see in the picture down there, some of the doors are actually opened, and these trains were very hot because they had no air conditioning. So sometimes in the summer, when you actually were on these trains, it was a blessing in disguise to have the doors open to let the fresh air in, because people coming home made the train extra hot, and having the doors open, people were quite aware of having the standing near the doors, but not standing close to them, that they'd fall out of the train. But still, they would be um, not stupid enough to actually stand right there at the door. And yeah, this was a piece of history that Melbourne will never forget, and may never forget in its time. On the left there is a freight train called an NR locomotive. National Rail used to run the locomotive services around Australia. It was called National Rail. It was sold and it was rebranded Asiano. However, under Toll and Patrick, was under the one umbrella for a while, but then Toll have now got their own company, and Pacific National are one of the major providers of rail to run around Australia, delivering goods from Melbourne to Perth, Sydney to Perth, Perth to Sydney, Melbourne to Brisbane, Brisbane to Melbourne, Melbourne to Adelaide, Adelaide to Melbourne, etc. They also use their locomotives on the Garn and Great Southern, and the one from Brisbane to Melbourne as well, Adelaide, Brisbane to Adelaide, and the Indian Pacific from Sydney to Perth and vice versa. So the locos are used for that. Go to journeysbeyond.com.au. The one on the left, the photo was taken at Tallarook in Victoria near Seymour, and it's carrying a freight train. Normally they have 2 or 3 freight trains, but on this occasion this photo was taken with just one. It might have been photoshopped, I don't know, but it looks great. The 2 locos, the 2 lines here are going to Seymour. They used to go all the way to Albury. However, they are now just going to Seymour, and there's one broad gauge track going to Shepparton, Tocumwal, and the standard gauge track, it duplicates from Seymour to Albury, so 2 trains can run up and down the line simultaneously. On the right, it is another freight train. It's double stacked. So yeah, as you can see, I'm talking about my favourite obsession topic, which could be your son or daughter who's talking about this. These trains are double stacked from Goulburn in New South Wales all the way to Perth in Western Australia. They're also double stacked from Adelaide to South Australia. They cannot be stacked between Melbourne and Adelaide due to the tunnels and bridges. However, they're about to be stacked with the inland, double stacked with the inland rail um, from Melbourne to Brisbane, because the inland rail is being developed, and they cannot run double stacked trains through Sydney and through their network. And it's a tough time for all the drivers and all the operators getting a path right through from Melbourne to Sydney to Brisbane. Some of the containers can be offloaded or unloaded, but normally it's a single stack going right through to Brisbane. Emails. How many accounts do you have in your life? How many emails do you send a day to other people? How many emails do you receive a day? And what would you use them for? Mainly your accounts. We have one for work, one for personal, one for business. I've got 3. That's enough for me. I was obsessed with emails in my earlier days. However, um, I had about 4 or 5 and just signed up with these different pages at the time, but they didn't provide a good service. Now I use Outlook and Gmail for my emails and a domain name for my business, and that's good enough for me. So Roundcube and Horde are webmail interfaces that are part of a hosting package that you purchase for a website and a domain name as part of a hosting company. I loved using Horde. Most hosting companies around the world offer this. However, some offer Google Workspace as well as Microsoft Office 365 for business emails. Horde was part of cPanel, but after some time, the software being at the end of its life, it was phased out by the company, cPanel, in late 2022, early 2023. Roundcube remains the default email service for people not wishing to purchase subscriptions for these services or Google or Office 365. But as you can tell, it's a very basic interface. It's very boring and you can't use it for Teams or for anything else. It's just for emails, contacts, a calendar, but then you have to run that through your phone if you've got that software application on it. So who remembers this? The good old Hotmail where we had a gig of disk space and then gradually 2 and then gradually we were up to 50 gig or 5 gig or whatever it is now. I really enjoyed this interface that I used, and then Gmail came out, and then I remember using Yahoo as well, which are the 3 main competitors. Yahoo has extremely low security. However, I find that I've never had a problem with Outlook, and Gmail isn't too bad. My advice to you: risks surrounding neurodiversity and being stigmatized. Family members characterize autism and other disabilities as shameful and burdensome for those who live with disabilities. Neurodiverse people have to live in a world that sometimes is not structurally made for them. The lack of understanding of them, but also in their personal lives, is what society does to them. Feeling life is unfulfilled, meaningless, and unpurposeful. Developing negative thoughts about themselves, and eventually they sink into a great deep depression. They never see themselves greater at a task or skill than others do. Sometimes neurodiverse people, including those with autism, always see themselves weaker than others, e.g., lack of skills in specific areas, and that others are, and then that others will always be much higher than them. And that's sometimes what I see. I'm a person who's got 20 years of administrative training. However, I don't have what others have, and that makes me feel inferior and very disheartened because I want to try harder and I want to do my best and I want to try and be like them, but sometimes I can't. But when I excel in my specific area of technology or creative or puppets or drama, that's when I shine, and or public speaking, and or doing these videos of autism for you. Mistakes that people make when meeting people with diversity. They always judge them harshly even before they've gotten to know them properly. They see their disability first, not the person who's got the abilities, strengths and talents that they don't see from the outside in perspective. They're ashamed of them because they're too scared of them or having them in their presence. They'd rather go like this. They'd much rather not have them be there in the first place. They feel very uncomfortable. They say that they haven't got anything wrong with them, or they don't have a mental issue at all, or that there's something wrong with them because they just simply don't know their background. The old saying goes, never judge a book by its cover until you read the inside content for it, until you read the inside content first about the person's life beforehand. These are my contact details. Please email me or phone me or go onto the website, the contact us page. So that's www.ktalk.au. If you have any questions about this video, please like and subscribe. It would be greatly appreciated. And that's the end of this presentation. Thanks for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.